You may have noticed in the past several Sundays here at St. Matthew's during the prayers of the faithful, which follows after the profession of faith and happens before we offer the gifts for the Eucharistic meal. We offer several intentions, but in this past few weeks we have been making a point here at St. Matthew's to pray for our brothers and sisters of the Coptic Church, the ancient Church of Egypt, that have undergone horrendous persecution. I've heard that, I've read that there have been more than 60 of their churches burned to the ground. And many have suffered, some have lost their lives. And I hope it causes us to appreciate the freedom we have in this country to gather here in our little small abode here. Can you imagine coming here one Sunday and finding this place burned to the ground and living in fear? And so we have been praying for our suffering brothers and sisters. And this is good to do, and we do this intentionally so that we do not forget that even though we enjoy a great amount of religious freedom here, that we are still in solidarity with those Christians of another part of the world. And this morning I mentioned that to you in particular because there's a friend of our community. He's a printer, so he does a lot of our printing. And his name is Jacob. And Jacob is from Egypt. And he has a little print shop across the parking lot here. So if you look at the cover of our bulletin, he prints those for us. And he is a Coptic Christian, and he's come to worship with us this morning. And I just wanted, Jacob, could you stand up so we can welcome you? Honor us by being here, and so we want you to know that we are in solidarity with all your friends and relatives and the people of your church over in Egypt. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor, for they shall receive the kingdom of God." He also said, when he was giving this great sermon called the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the meek and lowly. Blessed are the humble, for they shall inherit the earth." My brothers and sisters, it is the humble, meek, and lowly that will prevail. The rich and the powerful and the arrogant and the self-righteous in the end will have nothing, because they have put their trust in things that don't matter, that have no value in the eyes of God. Today, the great theme of this morning's liturgy is the virtue of humility. And humility is an important virtue, and it is something that has been valued by the biblical writers, by Jesus himself, and by all the saints throughout the ages. And yet I think in our own day, in our own culture, this is a greatly misunderstood and greatly underappreciated virtue that is so essential if we are to really succeed at being true disciples of Jesus and to succeed in the art of practicing authentic and perfect love. It cannot be done without the virtue of humility. In the gospel story today, it is an occasion in which Jesus is invited over for dinner. And he is invited to dinner by a Pharisee. This might sound a little bit strange to us at first, because we're not the Pharisees, the opponents of Jesus. Weren't they the ones that had planted the seeds of dissension and opposition to Jesus that ultimately led to the death of our Savior? You might think that the Pharisees were truly the enemies of Jesus. And yet, it is not unusual for us to read carefully the gospel narratives and find that there were a few occasions in which Jesus was invited to be a dinner guest at one of the homes of the Pharisees. And in today's gospel story, recorded by Luke, it is one of the leaders of the Pharisee party which is a religious sect within Judaism, who prided themselves on their ability to practice perfectly the law and the traditions and to observe Torah without fail. And they invited Jesus to be a dinner guest in their home. Now, don't think that this dinner that this leading Pharisee put on was merely just Jesus coming over for a bite to eat, and there was just maybe 2 or 3 couples there with Jesus at the table, like it was St. Matt's Supper Club or something like that. This was a more lavish event in which there were perhaps more than 100 people that were invited over. It was a great feast. It was a great celebration. And there was a great crowd of people that were invited to gather around table for this event. And they had this interesting guest of honor, so to speak. They had Jesus, who was the great celebrity of the time. And so we can only wonder for a moment what was the motivation of this enemy of Jesus to have Jesus to his home. And we find that out as the narrative moves on, because as Jesus was there, we are told that the Pharisees and the guests that were there were watching Jesus very carefully. They weren't just being sociable and nice to Jesus. They had him there because they had an agenda. They had a purpose. They were rivals of Jesus and considered Jesus of Nazareth to be a threat to their very way of life. And so they wanted to create a situation that they were in control of, a dinner party that they were hosting, so that they could watch Jesus very carefully and find some way to challenge the veracity of Jesus' message, somehow to entrap him in a trick question, somehow to get Jesus to contradict himself. And not only that, but it was the Sabbath day, we are told. And so they wanted to see if they could get Jesus to do something to violate the Sabbath, because the rumors were abroad that Jesus was refusing to honor Moses, their ancestor, and would constantly be a breaker of the law by breaking Sabbath, by healing people who were ill. Because to heal someone, even miraculously, was to do a work, and no one is allowed to work on the Sabbath day. It's to practice medicine. And all doctors' offices and the offices of physicians in Israel at this time were closed on the Sabbath. So what does Jesus, what does he do? Every eye was watching him. So he obliges. A man was ill from a debilitating disease. His joints were swollen. I think that's called gout, isn't it? I'm not a medical person. Is there a doctor in the house? But here this man was suffering from great pain from this illness, which was a chronic condition for him. And then Jesus asked the question of the guests and of his host, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath, or is it not? And they didn't answer him. And then Jesus turned to the man. He said, stretch forth your hand. And the man was instantly healed in their presence. What a divine visitation that was at this dinner party. Really? How many dinner parties have you been to where you've seen someone who was lame or ill or suffering, and then that person, through the miraculous intervention of God, was healed? What would you do if you were an eyewitness of that kind of event? Wouldn't you be praising God and rejoicing? They were unmoved. Their hearts were hardened. And their hearts were hardened, my brothers and sisters, because they were filled with pride, and humility was nowhere to be found in their life and in their hearts and in their souls. And so as they were there watching Jesus, and this great healing takes place, in the next paragraph we are told Jesus was watching them. You know, they thought they were watching Jesus. But the reality was that God was watching them very carefully through his Son Jesus, who was the very presence of the divine life in their midst, and they did not recognize him. They looked, but they could not see. how foolish and blind they were. And then Jesus says, you know, when you are invited to the party, and it's great how Luke introduces this in the gospel text. Jesus gives this advice. He's always the teacher. He uses every occasion to try to win the hearts and the souls of people who would give him a hearing. And so he says, I'll give you this advice. When you come, as he saw the crowds coming and vying for the best seats at the table, he says, you know, don't be into self-promotion. Don't be seeking the best seat in order to lord it over others. Because you might take that best seat and the host might find someone more distinguished than you and then come over and ask you to go to a lower place. It's better to go to the lower place. Go to the most unimportant place at the banquet. And if you're sitting at too low a place, then the host may come and invite you to say, come here, sit up here in this place of more honor. It's practical advice, but the advice is pointing to, in a very practical way, the virtue of humility. Humility is not about self-promotion. Humility is about promoting others. You know, we are too often too impressed with ourselves. We are very impressed with what we're able to achieve, what we're able to accomplish in life, our position, our education, the money we have in the bank, the house we live in, the cars that we drive, if you have more than one car. And we take great pride in these things. These become badges of our importance within society. It's all an illusion, Jesus says, because everything that you are and everything that you have, you can't take any credit for. You have what you have by the grace of God, the one who called you into being. God is the one that gave you the ability to earn that money, to get that degree in university. God is the one who has gifted you with life itself and all of your abilities. You have nothing to claim any credit for. But you see, the one who without humility forgets that and has been lost in a place of self-deception. Do not be deceived. Everything you have is from the goodness of God and is to be shared freely with your brothers and sisters. And then Jesus goes on. He says, now when you throw a party, it's easy to throw a party for those people who will pay you back. You know, the law of reciprocity. You know, I'll invite you over to my house for a lavish affair in the hope that I'll get invited to your place for the next lavish affair that you have. That's easy to do. It's easy to throw a dinner, Jesus said to these guests that were gathered at the home of Simon the Pharisee. It's easy to throw a feast and a party for people who can pay you back. But the person who truly is possessed by the spirit of humility, the true humble person, will recognize that all he has, or she has, is given them by God. So then, invite the poor. Invite the lame. Invite the helpless. Invite those who are mentally challenged. Invite those who will never, ever be able to pay you back, and then that's a credit to you. Then you will receive your reward. But if all you're doing is being good and sociable so that you might get something out of it in your constant campaign of self-promotion, that's your reward. That's it. That's all you're going to get. And in the end, it's absolutely nothing. But if you want to win points with anybody, you want to win points with God. And that takes a humble spirit, my brothers and sisters. That takes the virtue of humility. And what is humility? Humility is the ability to be honest with yourself. To see yourself as you really are. All the good that I have because God has entrusted that to me and has given it to me to use for the blessing of others. It is being honest and recognizing your utter and complete dependency upon that one who called you into being. Your utter dependency upon God, your Creator. Everything you have, everything that you are, your mind, your body, your economic situation, your station in life is all a gift given to you by God. And when we recognize the truth about ourselves, then we recognize the truth about God. When we are in a state of humility, we are in a state of authenticity because we see ourselves as we really are, and we see God as He really is in our lives. And that, my brothers and sisters, is liberation. Why carry the burden of selfishness, narcissism, and pride? It's a heavy burden, and in the end, it doesn't pay off. But if we recognize the truth of our utter dependency upon God, that I am but a creature who bears within my soul by the grace of God the dignity of the Imago Dei, the image of God, if I am humble, then I am free from the shackles of self-promotion, and I can be about promoting others. I can be free to love authentically, and to love perfectly, just as Jesus did. You want to be a disciple of Jesus? St. Paul says, have the mind of Christ Jesus, who left everything, all heavenly glory, and came down to live among us. And He came to be a servant. And although He was equal with God, He did not regard His equality with God something to be exploited to lord over others. Jesus says, come unto me, all you who are burdened and weighed down by the stuff of your lives. Come to me. For I am humble and gentle at heart. I am meek and lowly, and my burden on you will be light. Believe me, the burden of humility is so much lighter than the burden of pride and self-promotion. For when I let go of the heavy burden of trying to promote myself and look out for my self-interest, then I have the lightness of humility. I am but the unworthy servant of the Lord. I'm no better than anyone else. What's the implications of this? The implications is that if I truly am a humble person, then I'm going to be able to welcome everyone into my presence. You want to be a fully inclusive human being? You can only be that when you're humble. And you see everyone as better than yourself. When you prefer others' interests over your own. How do we become an inclusive church, my brothers and sisters? By being a church of the humble. Recognizing we are all struggling at this thing in life. And whatever good I have, I'm meant to share it with others. And we open the doors to everyone. We turn no one away. That is the invitation of Jesus. We're throwing a feast here every Sunday, a party. And Jesus says, don't invite the well-to-do and the righteous who have it all together. Invite the poor and the lame and the marginalized. Invite the rejected of society. That's what I want at my table. I want all those who can't pay me back at my table. And that's what we're about here, my brothers and sisters. When St. Matthew's was founded over 25 years ago, it was founded upon the principle of inclusion. It was to reach out to the marginalized of the church, those who have been rejected and branded as unrighteous and weren't allowed to come to church anymore. This is a place that is sacred because God called it to being. And we are throwing a feast here to invite all the unworthy and the lowly and the poor. And we are all, if we really see ourselves truly, in a state of poverty. We are all in a state of great want and need. We all need the grace of God equally, no matter how successful or how religious we are, or no matter how unreligious we are. This is what we, as the people of St. Matthew's, is about. All are welcome. Did you hear that hymn at the beginning of the liturgy? All are welcome in this place. We exclude no one. We recognize the dignity of every human being, and we recognize there's a great diversity among us. And we're not to compare ourselves with others. We are to compare ourselves only with ourselves. Am I better now than I was 10 years ago? Have I moved along and grown in this thing called following Jesus? If we have done that, we have done well. But as long as we hold on to those prejudices and those kinds of ideas that causes us to define and look upon people as lower than ourselves, we have missed the point of what Jesus is all about and why Jesus came into the world and why we are in such desperate need of salvation. So let's hear the words of Jesus once again. Blessed are the meek and lowly and the humble, for they shall inherit the earth. They win in the end. And I want this community of believers to be with the winners, don't you? So let us let go of the illusion of pride, the self-deception of self-interest, and the mad pursuit of self-promotion. Let us be about recognizing the gifts God has given to me and be good stewards, and in all humility, count it a privilege that I can give what I have to someone who has not. And that, my brothers and sisters, is the gospel of the Lord.
Amen.
Shall we stand together as we profess our faith?